Let's start the final day of our discussion. So, this discussion series was a brief introduction to what Buddhism is. We discussed some of the fundamentals, and I was trying to discuss this in very plain language without introducing the terminology and the Buddhist lingo. And then the beginning of that was a very how do I say, it's not related to any doctrine, not related to a standard way of educating ourselves. We will try to observe and identify patterns of our own past, of our own story, not someone else's story, not a story from few millennia ago. We were trying to relate it to our own story. But today, I want you to introduce you to the one of the basic ideas of Buddhism. So last week we discussed this. We discussed 3 marks of existence: anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, suffering, and no self or no essence. And then we also discussed the 4 noble truths: dukkha, samudaya, nirodha, magga. I will not get into detail of what those 2 are today. But I want to introduce you to this idea called the 5 aggregates. Now, 5 aggregates is a way to explain our existence. Now, my name is Ananda. So, if someone asks who is Ananda, the way that I can identify myself is through the attributes which are attributed to me. For example, I am a Buddhist monk. So, I'm a Buddhist monk of Theravada denomination. So there's an attribute, there's something attached to me, and I am defined by the robe that I wear. But if you keep stripping down all these identities, you will be ended up with the identity of your body and your mind. And in Buddhism, the whole idea is about the self, and is the self true, or if the self is an illusion. So that's one of the fundamental ideas or fundamental questions in Buddhism. So before we try to identify whether there is a self, there is no self, or if it's a combination of things or whatever, we are trying to first identify what we call the self, or when I say I am, what do I really mean? What are the parts of I am? What are the constituents of I am? So to explain this, we have we can even call it a model of explaining. We have the model of 5 aggregates. Now, this is not the only model in Oriental philosophies to explain who I am. There are so many other models which are available in Vedanta, in Advaita Vedanta, and in Hinduism, and in all the other religions. However, in Buddhism, the idea discussed mostly, the concept or the model which is discussed mostly is the 5 aggregates model. Now, before we go forward on that subject, I want you to understand a very important difference between how we approach this problem. Now, if I ask a question like what is world? What is the world? The world would be the biosphere, the animals, the fauna and flora that lives around us. Or we could even call it the atmosphere, where the suspended particles are, the smoke and the haze are, and the oxygen, carbon dioxide, the atmosphere. We also have the hydrosphere. We also have the geosphere, all the minerals, rocks, mountains, oceans, hydrosphere. Now, this is a way to explain what the world is. And if you closely look at biosphere, atmosphere, geosphere, hydrosphere, we are always talking about things which do not necessarily have a existence because we exist. In another way, these things can be discussed, these things are discussed without me being present in the world. Even if I am not here, someone else can be talking about the biosphere, atmosphere, geosphere, etc. So the approach that we are taking is different. We are going to look at the world from our perspective, through my experience, not not through the knowledge which is available out there, but through the experience that I have. What does the world mean to me? So the world right now might be a little windy, might be a little cloudy, might be a little humid. So that's the experience that I have. And I'm not trying to talk about it from someone else's experience. Another way to understand that is this particular type of photos on Instagram, on social media. They got pretty popular. I can't remember the photographer, but so this couple would travel to all different places in the world, from India to China to Grand Canyon, everywhere, and they would take a photo from this point of view, this POV. So the photographer's point of view. And the very interesting thing is that if I ask you to go back down your memory lane, and then if I ask you to think about your childhood for a minute, reflect about your childhood for a minute, specifically when you were age 10. If you can go back to that time, you would notice that when you try to visualize it, you might visualize your face, how you looked like, what types of clothes you were wearing, what type of things you were doing, as if you are experiencing it from a third person point of view, right? Did that happen? Yeah. So when we try to visualize our past, sometimes we experience differently. I'm not saying we always do this, but most of the time we tend to visualize ourselves from a third person point of view. Now, back in the day when I was young, we used to play this game called Need for Speed, the car game. And the car game, all the games to date, they have different camera modes where you can be viewed from a third person point of view, or you can be inside and experience it as first person point of view. The games are called the FPS, first person shooter, FPS games. So you can be having a point of view of your own, or you can view the character, you can view the role from a third person external perspective. So the difference between the concept that I'm going to say right now is very much similar. The experience we have right now about the world, about everything else, is a first person experience. We don't see our face when we look out. In fact, our eyes have never directly seen our face. Does that make any sense? We have always seen our face through a mirror, through a computer screen, or through a photo. We have never directly seen our face through our eyes. Our eyes have always seen outside things. So this is our first person experience. Now it might sound very simple, but if you really think about it, we have truly directly never have seen our face. We have only seen the reflections of our face. Let me build on what I'm trying to say when you get to the rest of the model. So there's a basic difference of the philosophies, both Oriental and Hellenic, Western. There are two types of approaches, epistemological and ontological. Now what it means is that the ontological approach discusses about things which are not directly related to your experience. As in, rather we discuss about the materialistic or the material existence, the materialistic nature of the existence, like what it does, not what it is. So there are two different things. We discuss about what is the make of it, what it does, but not as an experience of what is it to me. I'll tell a small example. Now I have a mouse. If I am to explain about this mouse, there are two approaches I can take. The ontological approach would be the mouse is made out of carbon. It's made out of plastic, which is a carbon molecule. And it has so many other chemical components in this. That's the ontological approach. The more epistemological, my experiential based approach would be, right now I feel the weight of the mouse. I see the mouse, I see different colors. I can smell it, I can taste it, I feel it on my skin. So that would be a different point of view of discussing or describing it. So that's the difference we have, the epistemological and ontological difference. And so we are going to take the more epistemological approach in discussing Buddhism from here onwards, especially in the five aggregates model. But mind you, although I am doing that, Buddhism is not always described that way by some of the schools of thought. Some people even take the ontological approach, and some philosophers strongly disagree with that, because we are discussing about an internal experience. We are not discussing about the existence of material matter. That's not the periphery of our discussion or our whole attempt of enlightenment. So now, having said that, we are going to take the epistemological experience. The next correct thing to do would be to find out how do we experience those things. So how do we experience those things is that we have five, or rather six sense bases. So in Buddhism, you would find this idea a lot, the six sense bases. I'll start from the bottom. You find the body, tongue, and nose. So these are the Pali words: kaya, jivha, gana. Ear and the eye, and then mind as a separate sense base. Now I'll tell you what's a difference between each of those. In fact, some of them might look very straightforward. From the body, from the skin, we have the sensation of touch, the haptic sensation. From the tongue, we have the taste sensation. Nose, the odor. Ear, the sound. Eye, the image. And by mind, we have mental objects. Now, what does that mean? Now, the body and touch, we can relate to that. Using our fingertips, we can touch something and we feel the object, we feel the touch. In fact, we'll get into what we can feel through our body later on. But we feel the touch, we feel the odors, we feel the tastes, we hear sounds, and we can see images. Straightforward. But the mind can think of things which we have never seen before, which we have never heard before, which we have never tasted before. We can come up with things. So there are mental objects which are not directly related to eye, ear, nose, etc. But again, if you closely look at it, all these mental objects that you would normally perceive are based on the inputs we have gotten from the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, etc. If I ask you to visualize a refrigerator, you are thinking about a refrigerator that you saw, the cold that you felt. If I ask you to visualize about a rock, you're going to think about the hardness of the rock, the color of the rock, the texture. If I ask you to think about berries, blueberries, you're going to think about the taste, the smell, the color again. So the mental objects are again somewhat directly related to these, but when you get into meditation, there are certain states of your mind where you don't necessarily have to think of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body based objects. There are separate mental objects which are different to that. But having said that, another interesting thing is to identify what is eye in Buddhism and what is image in Buddhism. Now, it might look very straightforward. Eye is the physical eye that we see. But in Buddhism, that is not the eye that we are talking about. Very interesting and very important. Very important. When we say eye, what comes to our mind is the physical eye, the anatomical eye that we can touch, that we can feel. But in Buddhism, I told that we are taking the epistemological approach. In Buddhism, the eye is the process of seeing, and the image is what is subjected to seeing. So now you will find the meaning of the second column here. Ear is the process of hearing, and sound is what subjected to hearing. Now you might be slightly confused about what I was trying to say, but let me take an example and show you. I'm going to take the example of a submarine, not the one submersible which went down, but the submarines. They have these things called the periscopes. So the function of the periscope is that when you are submerged, you can put your periscope up and then you can look around because it has a way of collecting what's on above the water level, and then giving that information to the pilot who's going to operate the submarine. Now how it works is that there are reflective mirrors here, or nowadays it could be a camera. Back in the day they had reflective mirrors. It would collect the light from the opening here. It would reflect it all the way down, so a person down here can see it. So why am I telling this? In a way, our eye is also another periscope. Now what does that mean? Let's take the eye. So we have the eye. There's a coffee cup in front of me. In fact, I have a coffee too. So there's a cup of coffee here. When we look at this cup, I'm now trying to explain this from ontological terms, from more physics terms. Light photons come from the sun. They get onto the surface of the coffee cup. The photons bounce off this surface. Whatever the light came in here, the coffee cup is going to retain some, and the rest are reflected. These photons are going to travel all the way to your eye. At the eye, it will go through the lens like this, and it will end up at the retina here. And in the retina, we have different cells, cone cells and rod cells. So they are going to be sensitive and pick up the light, and they are now going to convert these photons to an electrical signal. And they will be now transferred all the way to our brain through the optic nerve. So this is what happened. Initially, it came as light, photons. The photons got translated to an electrical signal, through our conducting nerves. So the nerves are now going to bring an electrical signal all the way to our brain, and at the brain, at the visual cortex, you have a cup reflected again. Now, isn't this similar to something which happens at a periscope? You don't see the original image. You see a reflection of an image which is created inside your brain right now. Now that's hard to fathom. Now look in front of you. Look what's in front of you. Everything that you see here is not the original picture. What I'm trying to say is that what you're seeing is not real. That is not what I'm trying to say. But what you see right now is not the original picture. It's the light coming all the way to your lens and the retina, getting translated to an electric signal, going all the way to your brain. And in the brain, now something is reappearing. Something is reproduced. So it's a wonderful phenomena. Now look at me right now. On the screen, you would see me. You could see me. But how does this happen? My light goes to the webcam here. Webcam takes it to the computer, does the whole digital thing, converts it, and then sends the signal all the way to a server, probably in the US, and then it finally goes to the user, gets translated to another translate the electrical signal to another light signal, and the light you capture from your eyes. So what you see from the screen is not the real me. It's not real me sitting in the temple, right? Someone who's in front of me can see the much more realistic me, or more real than what you can see through the computer. So you understand, you see the eye is also acting like a periscope. It's not picking up what is out there. It's probably picking up what is out there, but it's not showing us what is out there. What it is showing us is the image that is appearing in our visual cortex right now. So that's a very tricky thing to think about. When you really think about, we have never really seen what is out there. We have always seen what has been reappearing or reproduced inside our visual cortices and all the other brain different departments. I will take another example with the sound. Now this is a cochlear implant. A cochlear implant is applied when some people have their cochlear nerve. Cochlear nerve is the nerve which takes the sound all the way to your auditory cortex. So that gets degenerated, so it stops working. So the scientists, they have a fantastic way, medical practitioners, they drill a hole and put a electrode all the way to the brainstem, and it can now transfer whatever the information which you pick from the earlobe all the way to the brain. So how it works is that you have a microphone here. The microphone will capture the sound waves. The sound waves are converted to electrical signal. They are then transported through the cochlear implant all the way to the brain, and the brain recreates whatever the sound there is. Now imagine a little child is born who has a impairment in his cochlear nerve, and then you attach one of these cochlear implants, so you have a microphone. Instead of putting a microphone there, what if you put a radio in this gadget? Whatever he hears will be radio music. We could even attach a pipe music thing. So when he looks at the Barry's Lake, he's listening to music. And if he's born with this, and if he's isolated, so it's a thought experiment, he would always think, what I'm hearing right now is the pipe music or whatever it's on the radio channel, right? So what we are hearing now, we think it's very real, but it's a picked up signal converted to a different form of energy, transported to our brain, and then the brain recreates something. If you think closely about it, it becomes quite scary. Have we ever seen, ever touched, ever felt the truth which is out there? Or are we always listening to, hearing to, tasting a perception which is recreated in our cortices? Now, that is what Buddhism talks about here. The I, when you say I, it's not the physical I, it's the process of seeing. And the image, it's also not the physical image which is out there, it is what is subjected to seeing. It might sound a little complex, but don't worry, we'll slowly go to the next ones. So based on this, I'm going to now explain you the model of the 5 aggregates. Now, how does the 5 aggregates work? There are 5 things, like the name says: sensation, form, sensation, distinction, formations, and consciousness. Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. Those are the Pali words. And Pancha, Upadana, Kanda. Pancha means 5 in Pali language. So 5 aggregates. Now, first of all, we need to understand what an aggregate is. What does that? What do we mean when we say an aggregate? So aggregates are things put together. Let's, for example, think mass in physics. A mass is a material in a heap. Like if you can collect all the material and then put it into a sack, like a potato sack, that's called a mass. So skandha or aggregate means things put together, things which are in a heap. So what does 5 aggregates mean? So out of the 5, let's take one, sensation. Now sensation, what we feel, can be heaped together in different dimensions. So there are sensations that are internal, like let's say that I have my hearing, and I can think of someone else listening to my voice. Now that's more of a contemplated hearing, but then I can visualize how would someone else hear me, right? How someone else would see me. So there's internal, external there. And then also the sensation can be coarse sometimes, very gross sometimes, or it can be very fine, exquisite. It could be something that we don't like, inferior, despicable, bitter, or it could be something which is exalted, tasty. We can think of sensations which are near, far, past, present, future. So all these things put together are called the heap or the aggregate. So you see that we are not talking about the material things in the world. These are all mind-dependent realities. All are mind-dependent realities. So the first form, that first first aggregate that I'm going to talk about is the aggregate of the form. I have put a conceptual sketch there. So let's see what the form is. But before telling what the form is, the easiest to identify form is to understand the Plato's allegory of cave. Now that's a wonderful allegory. Plato happened to live at a very similar stage, very similar age, era during as Buddha. So I don't know if they had any communication or if they independently thought about it, but the allegory of cave is very similar to some of the concepts which are explained in Buddhism, like the periscope example. So what happens in this thought experiment of Plato? There are prisoners. Plato's allegory of cave. So prisoners in the cave, that's another name for this. So let's say that there's a prisoner here who has been chained to the short wall here during the entirety of his life. So it's a thought experiment. So you could do anything to a person, right? And so he has never seen what's outside the cave. He has always been facing the blind side of the cave, and there's light coming from the opening of the cave. So if someone puts an image, puts a object like this through a fire, in front of a fire, this prisoner, our poor prisoner, would see the shadow of what this person is doing. So he would always see a shadow of it. He would never see the original picture of it. He would always see a shadow. So similarly, like I explained previously, the eye, ear, nose, etc., we all see shadows of things. And so this is the first version of Plato's allegory of cave, or the first explanation. But the real idea that Plato is trying to say is even more beyond. Plato is telling that everything that we see is nothing but a conceptual formation which is in our head. Now I think I have told you this before in the previous days. When you see me, you see a Buddhist monk. Why? Because you already know about Buddhist monks. You have Googled, you have met me, and that's why you are looking at a Buddhist monk. I have a good friend who's from Sahara, Africa, imaginary thought experiment, of course. So I invite him to come here. He's a bushman from Africa. He has never stepped out of the African forest. If we keep him in front of here, suppose we can communicate to him in some form. If I ask him, what are you seeing? Are you seeing a Buddhist monk? He would say, I don't know what a Buddhist monk is. I'm just looking at a human. I'm looking at a male person who's wearing a robe. Looks like a Maasai robe, but maybe not. So you see, everything that you see in your room right now, you have a concept, a form in your mind about what it is. I see a gong in front of me. I see a camera. I see meditation cushions, chairs, a speaker. I have some form of a concept about it. Let's say that I am seeing something, an object, which I have never seen before in my life. I still know what it is. I know that it is something that I do not know. So I still have a concept about it. So let's say that I'm seeing this for the first time. I don't know what it is, but I still have a concept. The concept is that I do not know what it is, and it's different to all the things that I already know. See, it's a pretty mind-boggling thing when you try to really understand this. So that's Plato's allegory of cave. So in very brief, what I'm trying to say is that we have our own conceptual ideas about everything that we see, everything that we hear, everything that we taste. There's a conceptual idea behind that. Even if we haven't encountered that particular thing, we still have, the moment we hear that, see that, sense that, we have a conceptual idea that it is something that I have not seen before, right? So it's very difficult to separate this conceptual formation in your mind whenever you come in contact with any object through your 5 sense bases or 6 sense bases. So that's Plato's allegory of cave. So in Buddhism, what we are trying to say is that these 5 things together, they make up the I or the me or what you call your existence or your experience. So we have the first part of it. So it's the same mind. We are trying to divide it into 5 categories and then analyze each in a very detailed way. How we usually analyze is through meditation. So that's the practical aspect of it. So we are trying to theoretically identify this first, but identifying this theoretically does not make any sense until you see that, until you experience that. It does not make much sense, but it's good to just look at what's what and then try to understand that. Okay, so what we are going to do now is that we have the form, and in Buddhism the forms are explained that there are basic 27 types of forms in your mind, and all the other forms that you see, other forms that you have in your mind are derivatives of those fundamental 27 forms. And out of these 27 fundamental forms, there's 4 very fundamental forms, and they are the first type of concepts that you would have from the beginning of your existence. So in a very loose translation, they are the earth, water, fire and air. But mind you, we are not talking about the earth, fire, water in the sense that we know about it. Let me take an example. So there's this little baby. So this is again a thought experiment. We don't know how the babies feel because we can't remember our time during our mother's amniotic sac. So there's this baby who lives inside the mother's amniotic sac. He can probably hear, taste, etc. But he's living in this environment inside the placenta. He's living in this environment. His body temperature and the temperature of the outside, which is his mother, is same, right? So he does not feel the difference of temperature. He does not have that sensation, and he's floating on a amniotic fluid, so he does not have the sensation of the gravity because he's floating, like in taking a bath at the Dead Sea, you're floating and you're weightless. So imagine this child is delivered for the first time to this world. He comes out, he's kept on the cot, his first cot, on the first bed. The moment he's lying on the bed now, he feels something hard. For the first time, he's going to feel the weight of his own body. And the moment that he physically experiences that, he creates a concept in his mind. Well, this is what is like to be feeling the weight. This is what is like to be feeling the hardness of things. So the Patavi or the earth means, or rather Patavi means the toughness, the hardness of things. Now again, we need to be very careful. I am not talking about the physical toughness. When you do material sciences, material engineering, there's a scale called toughness index. You can grade the toughness of different material. Plastic is tougher than this, plastic is less tougher than the steel, diamond is the toughest one, carbon fiber is the toughest out of all. So there's a toughness index, but we are not talking about that toughness. We are talking about the concept of toughness in your head. Now again, when I say head, let's not try to pinpoint whether it's in a particular region of the brain, or if it's in a database, or it's a vibration energy. We are not going to go there. For the simplicity, we'll say that we have a concept about hardness, Patavi. So the loose translation given to that is called earth. And then the moment this child is delivered to the world, so he usually sits in, when he's inside mother's belly, he's at 37 Celsius degrees. But the moment he's delivered out, he's at room temperature, 20 Celsius. So for the first time, he's going to feel a difference in temperature. He's going to feel heat or cold, warmth or cold in his body. And the moment he gets in contact with that feeling, he will create a concept about what the property of Tejo is. So a loose translation is fire, but that's a very bad and a loose translation. So the idea is that he's going to feel the concept, or he's going to form the concept of the temperature difference, right? And then we have air. So during his time in his mother's womb, he does not breathe. And the first time he comes out, the first time we start life is literally when we start breathing. So when he breathes, it expands, it collapses. We see the expansion and the collapse of our something, our body. So for the first time, he sees a property, or he can form a concept of expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. Now, mind you, I'm not talking about your lung expansion and contraction. When we blow a balloon, we see the same thing: expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. When we see a fire far away, which we even can't physically feel, we still have the concept of the fire. We can imagine the warmth, we can imagine the smell, we can imagine the properties of the fire. When we see the Rocky Mountains, the rocks, we feel we have a concept of the toughness. I can't remember if it was this group, but I the other day asked, when you look at the statue behind me, what do you, the statue and the flowers behind me, I asked you the question, what is more tougher? Is the statue more tougher, or the flowers are more tougher in terms of hardness? You would naturally say the flowers are soft, the statue is hard. But then most of you haven't touched the flowers here or touched this statue. You might have touched and felt other statues and other flowers, but not this one. But still, when looking at this image, simply through looking at colors, you have the concept that one is tougher, the other thing is softer. So that is the, let me share again. So that's the concept. And the concept of apo, again, water is a loose translation. What apo means is that we have an idea about how something is more attached to another thing. Like the mouse, it has a weight, or it is heavy. But if I take like this statue, it's way more heavier. So what is heavy, being heavy? If we again take the ontological approach, it's the amount of mass into the gravitational acceleration, and then you have the weight in terms of newtons. So that's the physics explanation. But if we take it from our experience, when I lift the mouse, it's not that attached to the earth. But when I try to lift the statue, it's way more attached to the earth. So everything in this world has an attachment, an attraction to something else. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be physical objects, objects that we can see. It can be even between two sounds. Some notes are more in symphony attached to other notes. Some note patterns are more attached to each other than other notes. So you see that everything in this world has this attachment, and the property of apo means this affinity, attachment. So these are the four most basic characteristics, or the concepts based on the characteristics that we can form inside our brain. And from these four main elements, we create 23 other derivative elements, which adds up to 27. So I will say these things anyway, but you don't have to keep remembering this, just get the general idea of it. When we discuss about femininity and masculinity, now what does that mean? When you're a child, when you go back to your childhood, when you were 5 years of age, 3 years of age, 4 years of age, you don't distinguish between femininity and masculinity. Well, you still distinguish the difference between your father and mother. The father is more harder, mother is more softer. How I remember is that father has he has a stubbles, so it's very abrasive. The mother's face is more softer. So you find a difference between those two forms. But the true meaning of femininity and masculinity, you register it as and when you grow old. Through your experience, through what the society assigns, a binary gender assignment. So based on that, you start forming an idea about what is masculinity and what is femininity. So if you really look at it, now we have non-binary assignments. If you really look at it, it's a conceptual thinking which sits in your mind. Each person will have different concepts, and as and when you grow older, your concepts will change. So that's another derivative form of the rupa, or the concepts which can sit in your mind, or the forms. So the list goes on for very long. I'll tell you a few. We have the concept of lightness, weightlessness, buoyancy. So that's one concept you could have. You have the concept of beginning, birth of something. So when we look at the flowers here, some flowers are quite fresh, some flowers are not quite fresh, some flowers are withering away. So we can see, when we look at anything, look at a person, look at a bird, we know if he's more closer to the birth or more closer to the end. So we see, based on what we see, we have a concept that this is more closer to the birth and this is more closer to the end. If we really look at it, we are discussing about this concept you have in our mind about the beginning, aging and decay. Last time I spoke about impermanence, anicca. Even impermanence is nothing but a concept that you have in your mind. So when you look at things, you find the quality of impermanence, but it's another form, it's another conceptual idea that you have in your mind. Another nice example is kabalinkara ahara, or food. What is food? What does food mean to each and every one of us? So today I got a nice treat from one of our neighbors. For the first time I was having that. Now I like it. Someone could hate it. You find all sorts of different exotic foods. Some, like take an example, durian. Some people really like durian. Some people hate durian. Is it because of a allergic reaction that the body has? Probably not. Some people are allergic to, they have their different allergies. So that's a physical reaction. But most of the time you might see that your likeness and dislike to certain types of foods are not based on your physical characteristics, but based on your mental thinking, how you think about that food. So we have different religions. We have kosher, we have halal, we have Jainism, which prohibits eating non-vegetarian stuff, only vegan. So each, based on your religious upbringing, you would hate certain food, you would love certain food, and based on your cultural upbringing, you would like a dish of snake, or you would extremely hate a dish of snake, right? So what we have, the likeness and dislike, what is food and what is not food, is a concept. Now, having said that, we also discussed this in a previous day. Just because I conceptually think that I can eat this mouse, it does not let me give me the physical ability to eat the mouse or eat wood like a beaver. It doesn't happen that way. So there's a range that we discussed the other day. There's a ideal range that each life form can perceive and experience in this world. Now the geese that I see in front of me, they can eat out of the muddy, sulfur-rich, pH high lake. If I try to eat that, I'm going to get sick. So that's not eating that water. Lily pads is not an option for me. But they can do that. The termites can eat wood, but I can't eat wood. But I can opt to eat chicken versus a dish of snake based on the concept that I have in my mind. So those are the few differences. So that's the first one, the Rupa Skandha. Seems like I'm running out of time to discuss all the 5, but let's give it a try. So now we discussed Rupa Skandha. Let's get to the next one, the Vedana Skandha, or the sensation of Sanya Skandha, distinction. So what is distinction? When we look through our eye, again, I'm not talking about the physical eye now, I'm talking about the process of seeing. What is subjected to seeing has a distinction. For example, the blue color here is different. It's different to the yellow color, and it's different to the red color. So based on your, again, partly physical ability to perceive, if you're not colorblind, there's a shade of colors that we can see from ultraviolet to infrared. But purple is different to yellow. Green is different to red. They are opposite colors. So there's a distinction between the colors that we see through our process of seeing. I'm being careful not to say the eye that we usually refer to, the physical eye. So the same applies to our ear. Again, I have put the symbol of a physical ear here, but I'm talking about the process of hearing. So based on the amplitude of the vibration, we can hear soft or loud. We can hear a banging loud noise, or we can hear a soft whisper. There are different frequencies. Based on the frequencies, pitch, we find high frequencies and more bass level frequencies. So if you take a choir, we have the high end and the low frequency range in the choir. We also have this other effect called the timbre. So timbre means that if you play the note C in a violin versus an organ or on a drum, we are trying to play the same frequency, but it sounds differently because of the waveform. So we find these distinctions, very distinctive distinctions, and that is what we can identify as distinctions. So this distinction is called sanya. Sanya is the distinction that we hear, listen, see in our experience. And then next we have the nose. So they say, so it goes on, the Pali Canon goes into a detailed explanation of what each distinctions are, not in the same words, but I'm taking a more contemporary example. So we have oriental, woody, fresh, floral. These are some examples of the distinctions that you feel through the nose. We also have the taste. Through the process of taste, we can taste sourness, sweetness, saltiness, bitterness, and umaminess. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth taste distinction. And so these are the distinctions that we can feel. And then if we look at our haptic sensation, the skin-based sensation, we feel the featheriness, the lightness, we feel the pinches, we feel the pressure, we feel the cold, we feel the warmth. So those are the senses that we have in our hypodermis or epidermis, the skin. So there are sensations on top of the skin, there are sensations inside our body. So there's all sort of haptic sensations that we experience, and we identify the coldness is different to the hotness, warmth. The pinchingness or the pain is different to the comfort through a feather. So they are distinctly different. So that's the distinction. And again, I'm talking about how our mind is perceiving these distinctions. So now mind is divided into 5. First we were talking about the forms, concepts of the mind. Now we have the distinctions in the mind. And then comes the harder one, it's the mental formation or sankhara. Now, what does this mean? Is the easiest thing is to compare this to a movie. Now, what happens in a movie is that we sort of try to shoot a movie. If you look at the process of shooting a movie, we have the whole movie, but it's nothing but different locations shot and stitched together. So in a way, the sankhara or the mental formation means conditioned things or gluing things together. So again, let's go back to this example. You see the statue versus the flowers. When you look at it, and when I asked the question, which is more harder, what you did was you took a library shot of a flower that you have touched, stitched it with what you see here now, and then gave it a meaning and told me, well, the flower is softer. So you see, we bring things from the past, bring things from the future, stitch them together, add more animation to it, and then we describe things. So that process is called the formations or the sankhara. So let me take an example of a movie. What is the movie we have? Okay, so we have the movie Avatar. I'm sure that most of you have seen the movie Avatar by James Cameron. Apparently James Cameron is from Canada, right? So we have this in this movie. So Avatar is a movie where there's the human form is there, and then you transfer yourself to another life form through which works as an avatar. So you are connected through your brain. So what happens is that this is the first shot, and then the same person is depicted in a different form. And in order to do that, you have to do all this CGI, computer generated graphics, computer graphics, whatever. So you bring a form of a person to a whole new level, and then you show a total new picture. So how you, the process of editing this is what happens in our mind. When we look at things, we add effects, we add sound effects. Now when we look at a person, based on the previous emotions we have, based on what we have heard about that person, based on the conceptual idea we have about the person, we can see an entirely different person. We can see a holy person, we can see a bad person, we can see an angry person, based on what we have fed ourselves. So we bring all these library shots from our past, stitch them, and gives rise to a specific type of mental formation. Again, I'm giving a very rough and unpolished version of all these things, but I'm trying to give you a basic idea of what it is, and then we really need to have a more refined version later on. But don't completely accept what I'm telling about this model. I'm trying to teach you this model in the simplest way which is available. So it might be wrong if you really look at it technically. Let me take another example. Friends, you know this television series, very famous in the 90s, I guess, Friends. So if you look at the set where the tele soap is shot, the rom-com is shot, you can even get invited to go and join the audience and laugh. So if you look at it, the same set is divided to the office of Chandler Bing, this one's office, this one's house. So it's the same place, but through the camera angles, we find that it's different locations. So all these different locations are stitched together, and we have a whole new experience that we can talk about. Well, this took place in this place. The other scene took place in a totally different place. But if you really physically look at it, what happens is that the editor is bringing up different library shots and then putting it in a movie frame, in a continuous movie frame, and this frame gives us this continuity, and it gives rise to a new story. So similarly, in our mind, what we are doing constantly is we are doing this editing, stitching process, and then we are giving meaning to things what we see through the distinctions, through the concepts, and through the other things that I'm going to discuss next. So now all these things again happen together. None of them happen in an isolated form. So it's a way to separate them and isolate them and understand them, label them, but they don't occur independently. It's like if you try to try to take a still picture of me, you can take the still picture and then analyze the monk Ananda, but you don't ever find a still picture of me in real life. Even if I'm meditating, I'm breathing, inhaling and exhaling. So you see, we never find a snapshot of a still picture in this world. It's a continuous flux of things. But in order to describe and understand, we take a still picture, label it and say, okay, this is this part, this is this part. But in reality, we don't find that. We find a continuous flux of things. So that's the mental formations. So like I said, if we divide, I'm taking a physical example again, the brain cannot function without the help of the other. All of them put together gives us this gives us the full picture. Again, another example is this elephant. This elephant will not be completed, the jigsaw will not be completed if you take any of these pieces out. So all these things put together gives you the full image. So the same way, the things put together, the form, sensation, distinction. So I did not mention about sensation. So sensation is being neutral, happy or sad. Now it's exactly not happy and sad. um, uh, Pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Whenever we hear, see, listen, we either feel pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So that is what's mentioned in the sensation part. And I discussed the formation part, I discussed the distinction part, we discussed the form part, and then the consciousness. The consciousness or vijnana is the acknowledgement, the witnessing, right? So now again, you cannot separate any of these things out. All these things happen together. If you try to separate these things out, it doesn't make sense. But if you take a still picture and then try to look at each one separately, it start making more sense. Again, now I conceptually, in a theoretical sense, I told you this. It might make sense, might not make any sense. The real way to understand this is to really experience it and then find it out for real. So the way that we know how to do is through meditation, and then we are trying to isolate what is the witnessing or what is the acknowledgement part of our mind. Is the acknowledgement part and the concepts, are they the same or are they different? So on and so forth. So it's a lot of work of trying to understand who you are. So that's the 5 aggregates model that we find in Buddhism. In fact, if you try to pursue Buddhism, you will find a lot of these. Most of the things are explained through the model of 5 aggregates. And I don't know if I was able to transfer this in a simpler form under 1 hour. It's a pretty it can be a pretty complicated model, and it can go pretty deep when you try to expand it. There's so many nuances to it also. So that's the model of 5 aggregates in Buddhism. So that will be the end of the main few ideas that we have to understand about Buddhism. There's more and more numbers and different concepts if you try to read. So we discussed about the 3 marks of existence: impermanence, suffering. Suffering is not only mental and physical suffering. The higher weight was given to the philosophical suffering, or the philosophical perennial issue in the existence. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. No self, no essence, or non-self. So very tricky ideas again. So that's 3 marks of existence. Then we discussed about the 4 noble truths, the suffering, the beginning of the suffering, arising of the suffering, the cessation, and then the path. We did not discuss the path in full, but we discussed some of the reasons, and then today we discussed the model of 5 aggregates. When you try to divide your experience into 5, these are the 5 things that you can label. Mind you, this is not the only way, but this is a very nice way of labeling you. Form, sensation, distinction, mental formations, and consciousness. So that is the 5 aggregates for you. So we are going to end the discussion here today. I'm sure that there might be some questions that we need to clarify. And the whole thing that we were trying to do for the last 8 or 9 weeks is that we were trying to understand our existence. And through understanding our existence, we were really trying to understand who we are. That's the whole purpose of what we're trying to do. So we first looked at the purpose of our existence. Why do we live? What are the primary motivations behind our living, existing? And then we looked at what happiness is, the characteristics of happiness. Why is happiness this way? And then we looked at what are the root causes for the happiness, the emotions to exist the way they exist. Why do they have the characteristic of fading away? And we looked at expectations, because whenever we discuss about happiness, pleasure, it's always associated with liking and expectation, chanda raga. We discussed about that. And then we discussed the philosophical part of Buddhism, the 3 marks of existence, 4 noble truths, and the 5 aggregates. What I have not discussed is what can we do with this knowledge. So we do it whenever we try to meditate here. Today we meditated. We have silent meditation retreats. Whenever we try to do those things, we are trying to get closer to these things, not through our learned knowledge through books or Zoom, YouTube discussions. We are trying to get closer to that through experience, which I think is the most important form of learning. We can conceptually try to learn, which is not bad, but it's nowhere compared to learning it through your experience. It's like trying to learning how to swim. We can try to learn how to swim through Zoom or YouTube, but the real learning is when you're pushed to the deep end and when you're struggling how to swim. So that would be the end of this discussion series. For the people who are going to be more interested about Buddhism, the more philosophical things, we will start a more advanced version of teachings of Buddhism. And also we will start later on, I will let you know the dates of how we can use Buddhism in a more therapeutic manner. Some of the teachings of Buddhism in a more therapeutic manner. So two branches, one a more philosophical and a more deeper understanding of Buddhism. The other, how can we use the teachings of Buddhism in a very practical, therapeutical manner. So the main purpose of Buddhism is to not have a therapeutic solace, but to have a very in detail depth understanding, realization and an enlightenment of what our existence is, what our purpose is. So we have all these different strokes for different folks. So that concludes the Buddhism for Daily Life beginners series for this time. And if you have any questions, we can discuss it. If you have any questions here, do you have any questions that you want to ask related to this or in general? We can have a chat. If we can't chat on this form, please feel free to contact me through whatever the channel you have, and I'm happy to answer you. Drop by, contact me on email, phone, whatever which works for you. All good here, Vincent? Very good, very good. So then let's conclude it here, and I wish you all the best, and I'll see you sometime again soon. And Vincent, I need to reply to you regarding the places where you can go in Toronto. So let's do that. I wish you all the best. Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitatta, which means all the beings in this world and all of you, your relatives, people who have passed away, who are attached to you, kith and kin, family members, may all of them be peaceful, may all of them be blissful, may all of them find the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Teruvan Saranai.